Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and with me, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, who's also host of RT's talk show, Crosstalk. Today, we're going to talk about an article, an extremely long article, I should emphasize, that has appeared in the once illustrious publication, the New York Review of Books. Used to be a must-read for anyone who aspired to have any kind of intellectual pretensions. No longer, sadly. The article is about the events in Belarus, and its author is one Slavomir Shirakovsky. His thesis, to the extent that there is one, is that the protest movement in Belarus is the same as the solidarity movement, which emerged in Poland in 1980 and crackdown of law and power towards the 1980s. Most of this article has no scholarship there, very little in the way of political analysis, little about the history of Belarus. It is all about advocacy on behalf of the protest movement. That the protest movement is the legitimate rulers of Belarus is taken for granted. That these people are the real popular, these are ones who have real popular support, as opposed to the President Lukashenko, who has no popular support. So
it's really worth saying. He has no support.
Exactly.
I think it was explicit sentence. There's no support.
That's right. A couple of points that I would make. First of all, this author is a fellow at the National Endowment for Democracy. So he has received extensive funding from the National Endowment for Democracy. And indeed, the opposition in Belarus has received an extensive, enormous amount of funding from the NED. This is publicly available information. Anyone can go to the NED website, type in Belarus, and you will get a sense of just how much money the National Endowment for Democracy has given to the opposition in Belarus. And that is rather different from Solidarity, in which was clearly a homegrown movement and clearly enjoyed widespread support. I mean, when they called a strike, and that was that. This hasn't happened in Belarus. There was a brief strike, and if Lukashenko really had no support, then these strikes would have been far more successful than they were. So that's one thing. And one other thing that I would say is that New York Review of Books shows how it's terribly, terribly concerned about freedom of expression and freedom of opposition in Belarus. It wasn't so long ago that the nastiest Julian Assange is a kind of an opposition figure in the United States. So here, wonderful. We have these freedom fighters in Belarus. A freedom fighter here, good riddance that he's in prison. Okay, what were your thoughts, Peter?
Well, you're absolutely right. This writer is a Pole, and he doesn't really know the history of Solidarity well, but I'll get to that in a second. The writer admits, calls himself a sociologist, but later in the article he says he's a journalist, okay? And he's more of a participant in events and not describing them. I mean, I appreciate the honesty there, but I mean, what hat are you wearing, okay? Number two, this is rose-tinted glasses. You're going to see what you want to see. You're wearing a prescription you'll see what you want to see. And the Women's March, well, I don't deny that's happening there, but that's not the center of it. It's not the origins of it. It's something you like to focus on, okay? About solidarity. Solidarity wasn't about democracy at all. It was about workers' rights. As a matter of fact, if you look at some of the writings of Mitnick and Kuran, Mazowiecki and Wałęsa at the time, I mean, there was a real struggle about how to how a trade union, an independent trade union, could exist in a country of actual existing socialism. That's what they called it at the time. And it was a huge debate, and they refused power. And that's why we had the term self-limiting revolution, because they didn't want to grab power. Well, in this case, I suppose, ergo, these protesters, that I'm not sure if that's particularly true. I mean, it wasn't proven. Okay, there's no analysis right there. Are protests in Belarus legitimate? Absolutely. Okay, no problem. But you know, the Lukashenko, he positioned himself as what he's done is personalized power, and that can go south through time. Okay, and I can understand people wanting institutional legitimacy, all right? But you know, how much support did he get in the election? We really don't know. And my gut tells me that he probably got 50% plus one, okay? Because there's a lot of state workers in Belarus, okay? Did he get what he claimed? I tend to cast doubt on that, but did he lose? I would cast doubt on that as well. The author goes through a litany of human rights violations during the time of these protests. It's not sourced. There's no sourcing. Okay, I mean, I believe I don't even understand called the country that you come from, and you're telling me you understand this, but you don't understand your own country's history. No, this is just neoliberalism on steroids. Okay, this is hackery. It's a hack job. Okay, and what it does is it pulls on your heartstrings. You know, this is all emotion. It's not an analytical piece. It's not particularly smart. The only thing that is excessive is it's long. Okay. But that's the whole purpose. It is just to flog away all the way down the page, a very long page. But you leave the article, if you're a person that's wanting to understand what's going on in Belarus, you don't really know. You don't really learn very much, okay, outside of the very, very strong preferences and prejudices of the writer.
That's right. That's right. And I think your point about the lack of sources is very telling, because, for instance, he says, "Oh, you know, many people were killed." Hey, how about who? I mean, that sort of thing one would know about very quickly. I mean, people say, "Hey, this person has disappeared, and I don't know anything about him." So give us some names. I mean, you know, who have they found any bodies? I mean, don't just say, "Oh, many people have been killed," and there have been midnight burials of dead bodies. You know, Belarus is a small country. I mean, if somebody just disappeared off the face of the earth, we would definitely know about that. So he doesn't cite any names there. And as you say, I mean, really, you have to ask. You know, this is, you know, in the case of Poland, you know, communist Poland, you say, okay, ultimately they will stay in, the government stays in power because there's always the Red Army, the fear that the Red Army would come in and bail it out, much as it did in the case of Hungary and then in Czechoslovakia. But here, if Lukashenko really had no support, he'd be out. I mean, that's it. I mean, he'd be out. You can't just hold on to power when everybody hates you. And that's why the argument in this piece is so silly.
You know, one of the things a lot of people don't understand about Poland in the 1980s, and I lived there a number of years in the 1980s, and it was a life-forming experience for me. But you know, living there, and of course, I was a university student and university lecturer, so people know what was going on. It was very clear to me very soon on after starting to live there, is that the country, it wasn't a binary polarization. It was 30% were against, 33% were against, 33 were in the middle, watching both sides, and then you had people that supported the state. I'd like to remind everyone knows from my accent, I'm an American. That was the same case in the American colonies before the Revolutionary War. It was about 33%, 33%, and 33%. You could, those rough indications could also apply to what was happening pre-Bolshevik coup. Okay, there's sociological foundations for these kinds of things. But this article gives you the sense there's no support. Well, then it doesn't make any sense, okay? It doesn't make any sense at all. So Um, I think you've probably found it interesting too is how the author dealt with Russia. It was kind of in a very awkward way because they don't want to legitimize Putin's Russia or Russia's Putin. Take your preference there, but there's no anti-Russian sentiment in the protests. That probably irked the Pole. Okay, and actually making Russia look foolish for subsidizing Lukashenko. And I say Lukashenko, not Belarus, Lukashenko. And there's a lot of people here in Russia saying, what are we doing there? It's not a good investment there. Okay, the people of Russia support Belarus, but Lukashenko, he's not a popular figure in Russia. Far from it. He used to be in the 1990s, late 1990s, when they were talking about the union. Once the union was complete, and Lukashenko has not completed all of his obligations, he'll run for president of Russia. And who spoiled it for him? Putin spoiled it for him, okay? Because he was a household name in the late 1990s.
Right. Yes. It's a very interesting one because it seems like his animus was very much toward Belarus, or toward Lukashenko. He kind of left Russia alone, exactly to say, Russia's being naive. Basically Lukashenko is someone they can't trust. The moment they've bailed out Lukashenko, he's going to turn on them. And then you kind of wonder, as in fact one had to wonder in the case of Poland's sudden fascination with the internal developments in Ukraine, whether Poland has some territorial ambition. Remember, it had occupied much of Belarus after the war, the Russo-Polish War in 1919, and in the Treaty of Riga, it actually helped itself to quite a chunk of territory in Belarus, which was then subsequently returned by after World War II. So you always wonder, is there some other agenda? Because he's very much focused on Lukashenko and Belarus, and Russia just doesn't play any part in this.
Very interesting. I mean, having lived among the Poles for many, many years, our good friend Dima Babic, he's very interested in Slavic unity. He's very interested in that literature. I don't put much stock into it, but the Catholic Poles, they just look down on. There's a hierarchy of Slavic nations, and Poland's on the top. Okay, Belarus is kind of low. Ukraine is much, much lower, and of course the Russians are beyond the pale. But I'm not sure if it would be territorial ambitions, but it is a cultural superiority thing, and it's all through Eastern Europe. As well as I do. Okay, we have these small nations that have this chip on their shoulder about their cultural standing in the world. Okay, it's very real for them. I mean, we both come from very big countries, a superpower, so we don't really think about those things. But I've talked to people from all through Eastern Europe, even in like the Baltics areas, into Scandinavia, and they have this sense of their cultural identity and mission, and the Poles are very, very sensitive about it.
Yes, it is. It is kind of very interesting, the case of the Poles, who absolutely despise the Russians, whereas they have a lot of respect for the Germans. And so when you think of
it's true.
who created far more devastation and mayhem in Poland, Germany or Russia, I mean, there's no contest. And yet somehow they have a lot of time and a lot of respect for Germany, but for the Russians they absolutely despise.
Well, it's really interesting too, is that up until I guess it was late 2013, the Poles basically. Oh no, I can go back to the Orange Revolution. That's fair enough. I mean, Poles have a very dismissive attitude towards Ukrainians. Very dismissive. Okay, I remember living in the eastern city of Poland, Lublin. And they would say, you'd never let a Ukrainian stay in your house. They sleep in the barn with the other animals. I mean, people say this, okay? But then, because when Ukraine became a geopolitical pawn, and you have Poland part of the EU and a good member in standing of NATO, then they do the Atlantic Council's work for them. Okay, Sikorsky, we saw that. Okay, I mean, he wasn't the in my mind, he wasn't the Polish foreign minister. He was the Washington ambassador. to
Right.
regime change, and he's proud of it. Okay, and his wife obviously pats him on the back, and Applebaum.
Right. Well, in case of Ukraine, Poland definitely has territorial ambition, and they're quite explicit about it. I mean, that is a sore point, and it's something that they bring up all the time about what's the terrible injustice that Stalin did to them. Though, of course, forgetting the gift that Stalin gave them when he gave them a nice big chunk of Germany as compensation. But that they're going to keep. But what they
We could
that they want.
start. You and I should start an app about I want my territory back and see how many claims of different countries and different parts of countries have on others within the country and outside the country. It would be an endless game. And see how would anyone ever be able to sort it all out? Of course not. That's why Stalin did it, you guys. That's why he did it.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, anyway, what I think you will agree with me that the New York Review of Books has fallen on very sad times. I think the era when we used to read it with George Kennan and Stanley Hoffman and Ted Draper and even McGeorge Bundy or Robert McNamara, there's who used to appear in those pages. That's long gone.
Yeah, and you would have the new upstarts when like Steve Cohen and Sheila, and this stuff was this was the very essence of intellectual debate, and it was really exciting. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, George. If you bought and this is before the internet, if you bought a copy, it was thick, it was big, and you never threw it away. You never threw it away. You saved it, okay? And it's what I don't know. I've been gone for so long, but you and I have talked about privately off and on for the last few months, but when you sent me that link yesterday, I just thought, wow, I haven't read these pages for a long time. And after I finished the article, now I know why. No, it just that it used to be very much so that you had these area specialists, people that were really renowned in their field. Martin Malia, for example, is a very well-known Russianist and Sovietologist, and he played the role kind of as a referee. He kind of just decided the lay of the land, and a lot of people didn't like that, but that caused debate in itself. Okay. And now what I'm about to say, I'm not going to name names because that's not the point of this podcast. But you have people writing in areas that are woefully unqualified to be pontificating about this, and it's intensely ideologically biased. It's just sad because what it does is that it was a meeting place for debate, honest, rigorous debate, and on top of it, it was really well written,
very well edited, and as you say, there was debate, and the people who wrote for it strove to be fair. They always would weigh the arguments carefully, and would there wouldn't be this kind of propaganda. It would never resort to and essentially just banging your ideological drum. Oh, Russia bad, Putin is terrible. Hooray for solidarity. I mean, there was never that. I mean, it was always serious, scrupulous analysis and trying to strike a proper balance.
A good example of that, I remember it vividly, is when Gorbachev announced perestroika and glasnost. And the huge debate in Western academia when it came to the Soviet Union is he for real? Remember that? And there was, and one of the, just to back up your point here, if let's say Stephen Cohen came out with a big piece, Gorbachev is for real, and he had his detractors. In the next issue, they would devote pages to a response. And if Stephen Cohen wanted to respond to them, he was given pages in the next edition. I mean, for us, it was like keeping up with what's going, what is he going to say? Okay, what's going to be next? Okay. And as far as I can tell, because I don't read it anymore, that doesn't happen. And like I said, in areas that I'm familiar with, and I've seen a citation or something like that, I just think, why are you writing about these kind of things? you may be able to, you have, obviously everyone has their opinion, but there are some people that just have a master vision of what's going on. And the New York Review of Books kind of lost that touch, and I don't know when it was, but it's because of ideology is why.
That's right. That's exactly it. And that's what's so striking about it today, from what it was, I guess now already a generation ago in the Robert Silver's era. It abjured ideology. It didn't do that. And it never said, here, let me show you where I'm coming from, my ideology. It never did that. I mean, it always was serious and thoughtful, and always had first-rate minds providing first-rate analysis. So that's a sad commentary on our times. Yes. Well, thank you very much, Peter. And remember, if you like The Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.